it's very hard to get anything in past what you think you already know. Because here's what happens in general, and this is just ordinary educational theory. What happens at lectures is this, and it happens here. What the lecturer says that agrees with what you already think, you let in, right? When the lecturer says something that disagrees with what you already think, you reject. So you use what you already know as a filter against any new learning. So the net gain for so many people sitting in lectures is zero. They have filtered what they are hearing by what they already understand. And it's a real, that was my problem just in spades. I mean, I could not let new stuff in because I thought I knew it. I'd been around AA, I knew it. I knew AA, I knew what they said, I knew what, and so I got it finally one night at Sacramento Recovery House, the last place I had gone to, had gone through, and it was run by this guy who had been in Folsom Prison. He was really kind of a tough character in his day. He had been brought out here as muscle, you know, by companies who were union busting and stuff, and then he went on to a career of problem solving. And for the problems he solved for people, he wound up in San Quentin, and then he wound up in Folsom, and you know, professionally, he was known as Walter from Philadelphia. And so Walter from Philadelphia was like this guy, and he ran the recovery house, and I was terrified of him. You know, for Walter to get pissed off at you, kind of like, you know. We had to go back every Monday night for an AA meeting at the recovery house, and we were sitting there one night, and the subject is the insanity of alcoholism. And I hear this at meetings, the insanity of alcoholism, and we were all doing what you'll hear at AA meetings, talking about the insanity of alcoholism. We were like, one guy I remember was saying, I drove in the January, it was snowing and frosty. I drove from LA and woke up in Bakersfield, and I don't even remember doing that. And it was snowing on the Grapevine, and you know, and I don't even remember it. And man, that is insane. And somebody else, you know, and there was just a whole litany of insane things. And I told my insanity about getting my car jammed on the railway tracks, on the Western Pacific Railway tracks at midnight. I thought it was a good place to turn around, which it isn't actually. And because the car just fit exactly over the tracks. And so I had to get a tow truck at midnight, and I just got through thinking this is like a wonderful example of insanity. And we were sitting in the kitchen, and they had these big wooden kitchen chairs, and I hear one of the kitchen chairs just slamming on the floor, and Walter is like livid, and he says, will one of you talk about the insanity of alcoholism? And shut up about how goofy you were when you were drunk. He said, you guys don't seem to know the difference. And with that, he walked out of the place, went back to his office, and we're all like, what's wrong with Walter? I mean, we didn't get it. And I noticed this, you know, we just don't get it. And we didn't get it that night. And about 2 or 3 nights or days later, I went by the recovery house, you know, for a cup of coffee, and I said to Walter, how are you feeling today? And he looks up from his armchair and he says, you still don't get it, do you? I said, what? And he said, do you still carry your big book in the car? I said, yeah, bring it in. So I brought the big book in, and he asked me to Open it at page 35. And if you'd open your big book at page 35, some of you know what is on page 35. I had a lot of stuff underlined in my big book. I had a lot of stuff underlined in my big book. But I didn't have this passage that somebody's going to read underlined. Would you read? Would you care to? Okay. The top of page 35. So we shall
describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for obviously this is the crux of the problem.
And he said, wouldn't you sort of think that maybe something that is said to be the crux of the problem might be worth underlining? I didn't have it underlined. So what it says again is, so we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. For obviously, this is the crux of the problem. What is the crux? What does the crux mean?
The gist.
Huh?
The gist.
The gist of it, yeah, the heart of the thing. Crux, did any of you ever look at treasure maps when you were a kid? How did you know where the treasure was buried? The crux. The crux. The cross. X marks the spot. So it even tells us where to look for the crux of the problem. And that's page 35. And I had never read that. 3 years, 3 treatment places, I had never read it. The mental state of the sober alcoholic is the crux of the problem. And then he went and he showed me some of the examples. There's one like on, I think, page 36, where the guy who's been sober for some time, he's been in treatment centers, he's been asylums and all sorts of things. And then he's out this day and he's going to have lunch. And he has lunch and he has a sandwich and a glass of milk, right? And then he orders another sandwich and another glass of milk. And do you see italics? Do you see italics? Page 36. What do the italics on page 36 say?
Suddenly, though, I hate reading out loud.
Suddenly?
The thought crosses my mind that if I were to put on an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it wouldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk.
Okay. This is a sober alcoholic who's been through numerous places to try to stay sober, right? And here, clean and sober, suddenly the thought crossed his mind, if he were to put an ounce of whiskey in the glass of milk, it wouldn't hurt him on a full stomach. I mean, talk about the obsession getting its way. Then he pointed out another one, which would be page 41, I think. I only know about 6 pages, but I have to work back from them. Page 41. It's the story of a man who's been sober 11 months, and he's beginning to think, this is not that hard. This sober thing is not that hard, staying off alcohol. And so he goes to Washington about some government business, right? And if you look at that paragraph, it's almost like an interview with a psychotherapist. And unfortunately, there's people today, as we speak, sitting in their therapy with their therapist. And they're asking, Doctor, why do you think I have gone back to using or drinking? And they said, well, tell me what happened. Well, I was in Washington for some government business, right? Well, maybe you hadn't been out of town before. Maybe you had something on your mind that was bothering you. Maybe you weren't feeling well physically. Maybe your business didn't come off well and you were disappointed. Would you mind reading that paragraph?
I went to my hotel.
No, before it. The first paragraph.
I had been out of town before
Right.
during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that.
Doctor. See? It's practically answering all these questions that I just posed, right? The doctor is trying to figure out, why did you relapse, right? I'd been out of town before during this particular dry spell. There was nothing new about that. What's the next one he answers?
Physically, I felt fine.
Physically, I felt fine, doctor. Next one.
Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries.
See? Maybe your business didn't come off well. What did he say?
He said my business did come off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too.
In fact, doctor,
It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon.
it was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. Oh, you're in no trouble at all, right? So he crossed the threshold of the dining room, it says in the next paragraph, right?
Yes.
And you see the italics?
The thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner.
Right,
That was all, nothing more.
right. There you go. That's how relapse happens. It's not movie of the week drama. It's not hurt deeply, betrayed by a friend or lover. It's not losing megabucks in some deal. It's not some tragedy. It's, in fact, the end of a perfect day, maybe. And suddenly the thought crossed my mind. And all of this happens sober. We totally underestimate how deep this problem lies. And if we are like the stupid little penguin, thinking we can just change directions with sincerity and determination and go a different way, we're really in trouble. The last paragraph of that chapter, page 43, most of us know that by heart. Not because we learned it by heart, but because we have read it so many times. And that last paragraph says, once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. You hear it? At certain times, the alcoholic has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Not against the second drink. So it's not after the first drink. It is the sober alcoholic. And Walter tried, he took me through all of this that I've taken you through today. And he told me afterwards, he said, you just stood there, and he said, all I could think of was an old soft drink machine that I had put the money into, and nothing happened. Because I must have said something like, yeah? Or, yeah, I know? Or something, one of these, kind of bubblehead kind of things that people say when they obviously don't know, otherwise they wouldn't be continuing to kill themselves. So he says, I took one last shot at you, he said, and it was sort of the equivalent of like slamming the machine with your hand to try to get the coins to drop, and he said, so what he did was, and I remember distinctly, he said, let me try this. For 7 months, you had not had a drink or drug. Right. This is before I went into the recovery house. After suicide, incidentally. So, yeah, suicide in the rectory, I was a Catholic priest at the time, is not It's not one of the things they like, but they've had a lot of bad publicity since. But anyway, he said, you had not had anything to drink or no drugs for 7 months. I said, right. And he said, you got in your car and you drove up Freeport Boulevard in Sacramento and you went to Hollywood Bottle Shop. Was there any alcohol or drugs in you driving up Freeport? No. I told you, not for 7 months. You go in, you buy a bottle, you pay the man, you get in your car, and you drive back down Freeport Boulevard. It's like about 3 miles, 2 miles anyway. And he said, was there any alcohol or drugs in you when you were doing that? No. You go into your room, you pour the alcohol in a glass, and you do this, and he raised his coffee cup, and he said, even when it's up here, is there any alcohol or drugs in you? No, not for 7 months. And he said, and then you did this. And he kind of swallowed the coffee, and he said, then for 3 years, we hear you saying, you were fine until that stuff entered your body. He said, how could you remain in denial to that degree that you thought you were fine until the chemical entered you? If you don't know you were crazy as a loon on the way up Freeport and maybe for weeks before it. He said, so it finally got to me, and I said, Walter, do you realize that you're scaring the hell out of me? I said, you mean to tell me that clean and sober here, I just might pick up? And he said, you finally got it. He said, if you aren't scared by that, you did not understand what we were saying. My denial would not let that in. I did not want to believe that walking around clean and sober, I had no defense against the first drink. And I think that's probably where I'm going to leave that. And I hope you enjoy your lunch.